Hello. Well, how are you doing? You know, it was like 4 or 5 years ago. I had an idea, something I built in my head, that only involved two objects. And if they hooked me up to a lie detector test and said, did you ever create, even insignificant, a free energy device, I'd actually pass it and saying that, well, yes, I had. I was talking about that in live stream. I used a FLIR, forward-looking infrared device, and it involved a monster magnet, a 6-inch by 2-inch magnet. It's about that big. Got a couple of them in the basement. And these cast spheres of pure bismuth. Yeah, I would prefer them to be larger. It would have been better if they were discs for greater efficiency. And I showed with FLIR, shows thermal, that after X number of hours, I thought it was like 10 hours to heat up, that the bismuth sphere itself was between 6 to 8 degrees higher than ambient temperature. And I said, to heat a room up, like this living room, 5 to 8 degrees higher than it normally would be if you're able to equalize the temperature, would require about 20 to 25 of those devices. And the bismuth is negligible, but you're looking at, those magnets are really expensive, just shy of like 20 grand. But nevertheless, it requires zero energy inputs. It is a literal free energy device. It's basically blocking the drain of the magnetism, if you will, because bismuth is the most diamagnetic element in the universe. And so by putting it in the middle of that monster magnet, it's blocking the centripetal convergent magnetism, and it's causing resistance. It's kind of like if you wanted to heat something up, like friction-wise, like sticking your hand out at supersonic speeds, for example, the air hitting your hand would actually, of course you couldn't do it, it would, it would remove your hand. You couldn't really do that, but before that happened, it would heat your hand up as a means of resistance. I love, and I've spent an enormous amount of mental energy thinking about free energy. For many years there, I didn't think it was possible. Now I know it's not only possible, it's 100% possible. But also, too, as Nikola Tesla referred to Thomas Edison, who invented a lot of things, even though I don't really like Thomas Edison at all. He called him a tinkerer, because Thomas Edison kind of bragged about, the 10 zillion ways he constructed a light bulb before he was able to get it right. And Tesla, opines to the fact that, simply by thinking it out in your head, you could have cut off like 1,000+ different tries on the light bulb without actually having to build it. You're like, well, I'm going to experiment with this. I'm going to, see if this works. No, it didn't work. Over and over and over again. So he called him a tinkerer. And the point of that regarding free energy is the undeniable fact that we need to know where to look and also, too, how to look. And I know what those parameters are for free energy. I'm still getting those pyramidal magnets, guys picking them up in Hong Kong. Apparently he's getting some melanoma taken off of his eyelid. So I actually have some other pyramidal magnets, but they're a lot larger. Actually, it's hard to get it off the stool. You can see his stool is trying to get it off the stool here. It's attached. This is a compound point source object. There's a friend of mine who's the largest importer of permanent magnets in the United States. His name is George Mizell. You could find him on his YouTube page, Super Magnet Man. He's actually created for science some of these magnets in an aluminum array. They have all the points pointed in the center, and two of the magnets all the way to the tip have a hole in them. You're actually able to put, for experimentation, little subjects at the very tip, and you have, I think he gets up to 1.5 Tesla magnetic field, but the same reason a fireman's hose nozzle works is for increasing the pressure of the high pressure that's already coming from the fire hydrant to the end of the hose to, put out a fire, say, on the 4th or 5th floor. is that fireman's hose nozzle, made out of brass, is conical, basically, of course, a pyramid. It's actually taking the high pressure water flow and it's increasing. It's stepping it up, and that's about the best near perfect analogy. And this is not my opinion or a feeling or a belief. You could actually take a Gauss meter, which I have a crude one, and put it on the tip of this magnet. You could also, too, feel it. I'm going to get too close to my microphone here. Feel it on the tip of your lip and your nose. It actually concentrates the magnetic flux right to the tip here. So the one and genuine time, and I know of no other example except for this, so you could say pyramid power is real, is in the case of a pyramidal magnet, it actually concentrates the centrifugal magnetic flux to a very fine point, and it's no different than the fireman's hose nozzle, that it steps up the pressure of flux. Of course, everything in nature. Hey, watch this. This is really pull this chair in close. Whew! As one powerful magnet. I actually even taped a 2 by 1 inch magnet on the base of it to increase the magnetic flux. It stepped it up another third of a Tesla. It's really powerful. But pyramid power is real. But this is about point source objects. Importantly, nobody's mentioned this anywhere, and I've mentioned this for some time, that field conjugation is a multiplicative. It's not additive. I like to talk about point source objects and the basis of free energy, which I'm going to get to that very quickly here. It's not additive. In the case of these field geometries, it's not like 2 plus 3 plus 4. For example, crudely so, it would be like 2 times 3 times 4. In the case of magnetism, I'll point out, and I've mentioned this countless times, that, two identical objects before they become a magnet, you could take one and turn it into a magnet and the other one and not turn it into a magnet. They're both quantitatively 100% identical. So why is this one now a magnet and this one not? This one is now a point source object. The only thing that's changed is the qualitative nature of what it is. People incorrectly think a laser is coherent light radiation, which is definitively and demonstrably true, but that's not what defines a laser. A laser is actually a point source object. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. The pinpoint of laser light that actually is coming out of the laser, of course light's not an emission, so even saying coming out of a laser is incorrect, is focused due to some double convex lenses that are on the end, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, on the end of the lasers. But laser light is point source light. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. This is how we were able to create holograms before lasers existed. We actually took mercury lamp and then we stuck a pinhole aperture in front of that, so we actually had point source coherent light, and then we applied a frequency filter, and then you actually had monochromatic point source light, which is what a laser is. So we were able to, and this is a historical fact, create holograms before lasers actually existed. A spatial value of 0, i.e. a point source, is the multiplicative technology that all future wonder will be. And this, of course, and I'm going to give a bunch of examples of point source objects here in a second. Literally the needle of power used to, of course, pierce the technology of what is desired for humanity. Magnets and lasers, of course, are the guts of nearly all modern technology that we use. MRI machines, lasers, the countless millions of magnets that are in every tool you and I use today, cell phones, computers, TVs, cars. The same light falling innocently on your hand, of course, is the same light concentrated will literally, using a Fresnel lens, for example, or a magnifying glass, will literally melt rock. Likewise, too, of course, a 5-watt light bulb is basically useless and unimpressive, but a 5-watt laser, for example, is dangerous. Space has no properties, but energy is diluted by space. So when we talk about point source here, we're talking about a spatial value of 0, whether that be centrifugal energy or whether that be centripetal, as in the case of one of nature's point source objects, which we humorously and incorrectly call a black hole. I mean, it's not a hole. The only reason why it's black is it's no different than the center of that Faro cell, which I've showed you a million times, the centripetal point of convergence towards rest. Any energy made from or concentrated to a point source, i.e. anti-spatial, or spatial from a point source with a zero spatial value, has a multiplicative power and a near magic-like property. The very premise of liberation itself, I'll mention this very briefly, i.e. theurgy, apophatism, the via negativa, or the samadhi, or the jhana. These are all different words in different languages, Greek, Sanskrit, and Pali, to refer to the exact same thing, is one-pointedness of spirit, or literally making the spirit a point source. In other words, no spatial value. This would be light at rest, which of course light is by definition rest. Nobody sees the ether, for example. We see field modalities of the ether, i.e. fields. Nobody ever sees light. We see illumination, and these are all references to a spatial footprint, a frequency, a disturbance, and the same is true for liberation, for example. And this video is not about liberation. I'm very quickly getting to what I've spent a lot of mental energy about is and the parameters whereby which free energy must exist. And for example, that one word in ancient Pali, like a point source of the soul or the spirit or the nous, different language words, different terms used to refer to the exact same thing, i.e. spirit, the sanctum, is ikaga chitasa, which literally means point source of spirit or point source of mind or nous. Is the exact same thing. In nature, of course, we have black holes, which is a point source object. Magnifying glasses, you know, you can take the same area of light that falls in your hand, which is innocent, and you take that same area, and you could burn through almost everything. Now, you need a larger magnifying glass or Fresnel to burn through rock or to burn through metal than the area of my hand, but you certainly get the point. LEDs, for example, and there's a reason why basically 99% of lasers are LEDs. I mean, have you ever asked yourself the question, and by the way, this is why LEDs are so bad for your eyes, is because they're quasi-point source light. Have you ever thought why an LED light is so incredibly bright and yet requires so incredibly little power? I mean, that's the reason why LEDs are so popular. Very little energy input, incredibly bright light output. Like a conventional flashlight that took even lithium batteries, like two of those 123 batteries. I mean, you had a bulb that had about 1/10 as much output, would drain the batteries infinitely quicker. You could stick LEDs in there and get 10 times, sometimes 20 times as much power and have a drain of something like 20% less, 20% of the 100% of what you needed to power a halogen bulb or a conventional bulb out of a flashlight. I mean, if you're old enough, you used to remember pre-LED flashlights. They would drain the batteries very quickly, and the light was not that bright. LEDs are point source light. That's also, too, once again, why they're so bad for your eyes. Radio telescope, parabolic dishes, lasers, magnets, free energy is point source energy, and I'd like to go into the parameters of free energy here. Once again, liberation of the spirit. Even a knife, of course, is that. A very, very crude analogy, of course, a knife or a needle. If you take the same mass in the form of a cubical rod, you know, it has a certain impact that's not very effective, and you can take that exact same mass and take one edge of it and sharpen it down, you're actually creating a point source of the same mass of metal. And of course, is incredibly impressive. I mean, this makes up a knife. I mean, that's a super crude, not exactly a point source object, but in the form of an objective point source object, if you could wrap your brain around that, as is the case with fields and also to a free energy that I'm quickly getting into here. So even a knife or a needle, you're taking the same amount of metal, except you're taking one vector of that metal and of course making it a point, sharpened to a point. So it's the same mass, but now it's infinitely effective to do countless things. You can make knives out of it and whatnot. Cutting objects, piercing objects. So the question is that in the case of an AC generator, which of course doesn't generate any power, it manifests it. The AC generator is an arch form, and an AC generator, as I've said countless times, is an inside-out magnet. The windings of the inertia for manifesting power, specifically electricity, is on the outside, and the magnet is on the inside, and these are rotated with respect to time. But an AC generator, of course, as I've said many times in many videos, doesn't generate power, it manifests it, but it changes it with respect to time. This is the case of an AC generator, that we have moving matter with respect to time, and this manifests the power that we have in every AC generator on the planet. But what if, instead of moving matter in time, we're moving fields in time using point source field polarity? Polarity, by definition, has a temporal phase. In the case of a magnet, that phase is a ratio of 1 to phi. 1 to 1.618. There are some actually variables on that, just as there are a variable in geomagnetic precession, which is average 42 megahertz. Depending on the shape of the magnet and how large it is, how strong the Gaussian field is, there's still an average, median, or mean temporal disparity of 1 to phi. So, free energy has a temporal phase, is a compound polarized point source geometry for realizing free energy. Magnetic polarization, once again, is itself a temporal skew. To introduce a greater temporal skew, we actually have to take a point source object and make it a compounded point source object. This pyramidal magnet, just as every other pyramidal magnet, is a conjugate point source object. Every magnet is a point source object. That's what defines the magnet, is this qualitative difference between that and the pre-magnet. Okay. And of course I've explained why the magnet is the point source object. Of course it's incommensurable too. You can cut a magnet in half and you got two magnets. You haven't separated out polarity. It's completely impossible. That's not my opinion. That of course is a fact. You can't separate out polarity. The point source field is itself incommensurable. That's why if you cut a magnet in half, not that ceramic magnets can easily be cut, they'll actually just crumble into pieces, for example, but you'll just end up with two new magnets, and each magnet will have its own conjugate pair of polarization. But when you make the polarized point source object pyramidal like this, then you actually have multiplicative point source, and this is the reason why I have the pyramidal magnets ordered. So you're able to introduce a greater temporal disparity in a non-moving structure that is only a special geometry. The only reason, and of course an AC generator, which doesn't generate power, manifest power, is that you are moving matter in time. You actually have kinetic input, moving the magnetic field with respect to time, and as Oliver Heaviside said of the large AC generators at Niagara Falls, that they were, quote, churning up the ether. A lot of churning up of the ether, I think he actually said. That's just an arch form. But why have a kinetic input if we know that we're only rotating with respect to time, if we can't have a compound special geometry with its own temporal variable, that is the polarization skew of time of the magnetic field itself between the North Pole and the South Pole, and amplify that in the case of a special Hallback array. And Hallback arrays, actually, they don't always have to be pyramidal, but the best Hallback arrays are pyramidal. There's a lot of videos on Super Magnet Man's YouTube channel where you could actually see some of these Hallback arrays that he's created for scientific experimentation. There is no other possibility for zero input, free energy, output device than this. We have to have moving fields with respect to time on point source field polarity in a special geometric array of these magnets. The secret of free energy can only exist, and the answer is found in a polarized array of a point source magnetic array that is compounded yet further by being a pyramidal array. First point source, as I said, is the magnetic field. Secondly, being the compounded point source object of the pyramidal magnets itself, which concentrates the magnetic field. Of course, you could change the polarity. The tip could be north or the tip could be south. Obviously, you can make any magnet that way. That being the pyramidal point source magnetic flux, which is focused to an additional point. Said pyramidal magnets must, not assumption, 100% fact, focus the magnetic flux at a high pressure. You could take a Gauss meter and you could stick it at the tip of this little pyramidal magnet and you'll see amazing flux. I think this one's 3/4 of a Tesla, especially since I added the 2 by 2 by 1 inch to the base of it. Just like a conical fire nozzle, like I said, from a firefighter's firefighting hose. Tricking nature to harvest free energy can be no more complex, nor should it be, by definition, than knowing the special compounded point source geometry, and tricking nature that said fields within that array are undergoing flux in time. An AC generator only works that way, except you are taking kinetic energy input, rotating the magnetic field with respect to time. The temporal variable is about as crude as it gets. Remember, we used to fire, we still do, and they're kind of beautiful to look at, fire locomotive trains off of throwing coal into the boiler. You know, the boiler would build up pressure and steam would come out, and that, of course, would power the locomotive. Any and all, even the most efficient ones, AC generators, is about as crude and as antique as a coal-fired locomotive. What will turn this world upside down in a good way is free energy devices. It will liberate everybody from the shackles of countless corporations, of the government. Do you know how many constrictions there are to production and manufacture simply by the cost of power to do same? What if you could have the most remote house imaginable, a tiny free energy device, which is scalable, by the way, about the size of a shoebox. It would power everything in the house. I can't stand electric cars because they're so crude and so awful. But I mean, the future would become all you would have to do if you left the house and you only had one. Well, I can only afford one free energy device. Well, you unplug it, deshackle it from the house, you stick it in your car, you go run a million errands, you take a 2,000-mile vacation, you do anything and everything you want, you come back home, you unplug it from your car, you stick it back in your house, everything. All the power tools, all the farm tractors. Do you know how much money your fruits and vegetables are due to the cost of diesel to power those behemoth farm tractors, they're absolutely enormous. I mean, they weigh a gazillion tons. They consume, even the most efficient ones, consume an enormous amount of diesel. Free energy would unshackle every person and everything in absolute beautiful independence from corporations and the government. The secret of free energy can and must, not my opinion, or feeling or belief, must exist in the answers of point source ether disruption. And the current arch form of the AC generator is as crude, it's even more crude, than a coal-fired locomotive. Even more crude. We look back at coal-fired, even though it's beautiful and fun to look at, we look back at stuff like that, it's like, oh, how quaint. This is before we figured things out. We just look at it. It's fun to reminisce and look at that, but no one, they're not building those anymore. Actually, somewhere in the world they might still be building coal-fired locomotive just for who knows what reason, for sheer antiquity or lack of technology. But nobody would use that anymore. It's dirty and inefficient, and extremely inefficient. Free energy does have a temporal phase. We have to take hold of one thing, introducing a temporal variant into the geometry of a system, which necessitatively must run off a point source field. There's no other way, definitionally, to have a zero input to power it so it could extract a different form, a higher form. In other words, over unity. I can put 1 watt in but get like 1,000 watts out. It's like you still got input. And as long as you actually have to feed the output, you got a problem. I mean, it's still a good problem. Way better than anything we have today in current open society. But nevertheless, the only way you could have a zero input, all you want output, necessitates a point source field geometry. All technology runs off of this. Magnifying glasses, LEDs, radio telescopes, parabolic radio dishes, lasers, magnets, even liberation itself. Nature's versions, of course, are stars, black holes, like lattice array of crystals. That's kind of close to an LED. An LED is not exactly a point source object. It's a quasi-point source object, but it is essentially a point source object. It's the reason, once again, why nearly 100% of lasers are LED lasers. This is an LED laser. There's about a dozen different types of lasers, but they're all point source light generators. Coherency is an attribution of what they are, but that's not what defines a laser. This is the only way free energy can work. A spatial value of 0, whether that be centrifugal or centripetal, a non-Cartesian point at the center of everything, because that's where the plane of inertia is that you can see underneath the magnetic viewing film or underneath the ferrocell videos, of which are probably posted at least 1,000 of them. The shadow gov doesn't care if you or I learn about anti-gravity. Anti-gravity is not hard to figure out at all. There is no energy on this earth, conventional, where you could have anything longer than a few minutes of flight off of, it doesn't matter if it's atomic, doesn't matter what it is. The only thing that makes an anti-grav machine or craft astonishing is the free energy core that's actually powering it. Ignorant people are fascinated by anti-gravity, but everything works off of the right-hand rule. That's not what's fascinating. What's fascinating is the free energy device that powers it, because it requires a lot of energy. And you can't stick endless thousands of tons of conventional fuel in an anti-gravity craft. It's just not possible. The only way an anti-gravity craft works is off of a free energy device. Secret of anti-gravity is not the anti-gravity. That's not the amazing part, but the free energy that drives it. Anyway, I read every comment. I'll check you out on live stream this evening, and I hope you have a lovely day. Okay? Thank you.